Hello and welcome to another episode of AI in the Classroom Daily. I'm Dan Cogan-Drew, co-founder, chief academic officer here at Newsela, and this is a podcast dedicated to helping educators make sense of AI without the hype. And as usual, on Fridays, we're taking a look back at the week in news in AI in the classroom. And this week, we have three stories that we're going to talk about. One is about the expansion of Google and Khan Academy from pilots into classrooms. The second is a kind of a step back from the landscape of how AI technologies are being adopted into districts. And the third is a study from OpenAI, self-funded by the organization itself, looking at outcomes from instruction on critical thinking and the use of AI. On to our first story. This is a story about moving from pilots into classrooms, but I think the more interesting story here is what seems to me to be a little bit of a change in the product strategy behind Khanmigo. So as you know, Khanmigo is an AI tutor that's directly student-facing that was hyped in its initial launch a couple of years ago, and then there was a lot of language used to sort of walk back expectations and reposition the chatbot as being secondary to the importance of the teacher. So one of the directions that we see the product taking here is to much more deliberately position the teacher as the human in the loop, which is not something that we'd previously seen from Khan Academy. So let me break that down and why I think that's sort of a notable shift and why it's worth a mention in this week's news wrap up. So there were two capabilities added to Khanmigo that were discussed in this announcement and the work that Khan Academy is doing with Google and Gemini. So the first was interactive visualizations. That is, when Khanmigo detects that a student may be having difficulty with a text-based explanation, it can throw in dynamic digital manipulatives, visual assistance to the student. And they're reporting in their early product testing that this increases engagement and improves question performance once students see a diagram like that. And that seems like a normal sort of product development incremental improvement. The second is a tool for teachers, where the teacher can use Gemini to plan, draft, and validate practice questions. And the feature is called Practice My Knowledge. The idea here is that in addition to the student being able to work directly with Khanmigo, now the teacher has Khanmigo as a tool that helps them generate materials. And this is analogous to other products that are developing comparable features, notably Brisk, and of course, Newsela does something similar. But what's notable here in Khanmigo is that this represents, I think it might be overstating it to call it a pivot, but it definitely represents a reorientation in the thinking behind the Khanmigo product. Originally, it was hyped as there was a lot of hoopla around the possibilities behind AI tutors and Khanmigo being preeminent among those AI tutors. And what we're starting to see and what we talked about last week in terms of the research base on the different models for the implementation of AI chatbots is that actually the most effective positioning of the AI in that tutoring relationship is when it's an aid to the teacher. And the teacher can use the AI to gain better awareness of where students need additional help and what kinds of materials and generating those kinds of materials to put them in front of students. And so it's interesting to see that a tool that was originally launched as a student-facing one-to-one, sort of one student, one tutor model is now adjusting its approach to more effectively incorporate teachers, which to their credit is following the research here and backing away from that idea that all a student really needs is a really smart AI-generated tutoring experience. So that was the first story that we wanted to talk about. Second story is a sort of look at the environment in which AI is entering classrooms and is sort of stepping back. This is like a roll-up of a number of different pieces of news. What I thought was interesting here is the idea of AI as an arrival technology. Justin Reich from MIT calls it an arrival technology in the sense that it has not followed the traditional path of tools and technologies making their way into schools, where there is a procurement process and there is a definition of a problem to be solved and administrators run a formal piloting and so forth. This is an arrival technology in that it just arrived. And what's interesting in this roundup is this is sort of a collection of all of the things that go into process that are racing to catch up with the fact that this technology has already arrived. So This is an article discussing processes for vetting different vendors, processes for developing policy within the district, ensuring that there is a sufficient professional learning, that there are controls, and of course that there's measurement. That is, you have a tool that has arrived into your classroom, and now there's a race to sort of frame the use of the tool, put it back in the box in a sense, saying, here's actually what the instructional purpose of this tool is. But what the data is clear from the surveys, also mentioned in this article from sources like Common Sense Media, is that students, in this case, in Common Sense Media's survey, 70% of students say they use AI for schoolwork. And that doesn't mean that this is necessarily the AI that the district has purchased. This is the sort of arrival nature of this, is that they have access to the technology outside of school. So it's not such a simple case of saying there are certain technologies that are permitted and there are certain technologies that are banned. But from a policy perspective, we have to distinguish tasks and contexts and frame the way in which a technology can be used and for what particular purpose to solve what particular instructional problem. And I think that's telling that this is the position that we find ourselves in K-12 and in education technology relative to AI, is that 3+ years after the technology has hit, we're still, as a sector, racing to catch up to the more formal structures that have preceded the adoption of tools in the past. So this is a reminder that we're still a little bit on our back foot, because the normal sequence would be to say, we're identifying an instructional problem that we want to go after, and we've surveyed the landscape of possible solutions. We believe there is a possibility that this solution that we're going to pilot will be effective, and this hypothesis will be answered after we pilot it according to this data that we've predetermined is going to guide our decision. And then we're going to see the results, and then we're going to gradually scale that to the appropriate populations for which we think we have valid evidence. And that's being reworked after the fact, that whole model of adoption, when the technology is actually already omnipresent across schools and in the lives of students outside of school. The third piece I want to mention this week is a study conducted by OpenAI, and it's reviewing, the title here is Better Answers, Broader Thinking, What Students Gain from ChatGPT and Critical Thinking Training. And I think what's interesting here is this is similar to the move that we were talking about Khanmigo making, in that the context in which the AI is being positioned in the classroom and the impact that is being studied is being broadened. This is not simply a study about ChatGPT in the same way that the product development roadmap for Khanmigo is not simply about adding features to Khanmigo itself, but incorporating the teacher as a necessary agent in all of that process, the delivery of instruction in response to assessment. In this case, what the researchers are looking at here is about 1,000 college students in the US who completed a 20-minute writing task. The students were assigned either to GPT, critical thinking guidance, or both. And what they're trying to understand from a research perspective is the quality of the finished answer and the breadth of the thinking used to arrive at it. And so this is an attempt to understand process and not only product. And that's one of the things that I think is bewildering a lot of educators right now in thinking about what the emergence of AI means for how they need to reorient their assignments, because now so much of the final product that used to be the artifact that was assessed as evidence of learning, so much of that can be generated by almost 100% by GPT. MIT did a study internally recently of its undergraduate education and came back to the institute and basically said, look, AI can do almost everything we ask our students to do. So the implications for what we ask our students to do run very, very deep here. So this is an attempt to try to understand what can we learn about process in the age of AI, and how can we measure and define process and value process in ways that perhaps we've talked about previously in years past, but we haven't been able to lay our hands on. What the researchers found is that for the population of students who received both the training and the access to AI, they were able to improve both the final product and also the process by which they got there. They were able to increase the number of ideas, the idea diversity across students, which is something that has been hampered by AI in prior studies, was also increased. And so there was a compounding benefit of having both. So it's an interesting look into the idea that the AI plus training that is not AI oriented might result in greater benefits. And it's also, I think, an acknowledgement that the AI by itself is not sufficient. And we're seeing that evidenced in a couple of ways here in the Khanmigo example, where there's an effort to incorporate the teacher much more meaningfully and purposefully, as the research indicates it is a necessity. And then we're also seeing this here in this research where the researchers are looking at not just the effect of GPT alone, but GPT plus training. So I think the understanding of the sector, this may be an indication that we're broadening our understanding to include factors beyond the AI, because we've seen already that the AI alone is insufficient. So that's the week in news. And as always, thanks for spending a little bit of time with us on AI in the Classroom Daily. And we will see you again on Monday. Have a great weekend.